The NFL draft is less than 2 weeks away, and there's even more updates coming up on my fifth NFL mock draft on the Fantasy First Down. I'm Ben Wasley. Welcome to the Fantasy First Down. And we are counting down the days until one of the most enjoyable days on the NFL calendar for hardcore NFL fans like ourselves. It's the NFL draft. And I've got another mock draft for you this year, aiming for my fourth top 12 finish in accuracy in the last 5 years. Feeling pretty good about this one. It's all kind of starting to come together a little bit. Of course, it only takes one pick on draft night for it to all fall apart again. If you haven't already, it would be great if you could like and subscribe on YouTube. You can also ask any questions you've got on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. You can also find my updated mock draft over at ffdfantasyfootball.com, and you can also find my articles over at football.razzball.com. But let's get into it for mock draft number 5. It's nearly midnight here in Australia, so I'm ready to get recording. So we're starting things off with Cam Ward. Again, I've got the odds down the bottom from Bet365 because that's the easiest American website it is for me to access. They have a lot of VIG in a lot of their bets. I've done my best to take the VIG out and give you an actual percentage to give you kind of an idea of where they think the odds are going to be. But often that does kind of damage the favorite, and it's hard to know what they think the odds actually are. So just keep that in mind when you're seeing the probabilities down there, that some of the favorites might actually be a little bit higher than is indicated here. And Cam Ward is highly expected to go number 1. This has been locked in for quite some time. It's not impossible. Things will change. Things do change. But I feel like if the draft is going to happen today, it would be Ward. And I feel like even if they're allowed to, the Titans might just say that it's going to be Ward first pick. Realistically, I think you'd need an absolute haul to have a team get up to trade with them. And I don't think any team loves Ward as much as the Titans do. Certainly not enough to trade up to get them. Number 2, it's Travis Hunter. This has changed since my last mock, although I did do a stint on the Walter Football Show and went through kind of an intermediate mock draft there. You can go check that one out too if you want to hear our thoughts on a whole heap of different things, including the odds draft I did. But Travis Hunter is the new number 2 pick for me. He is the favorite to go number 2. I strongly disagree with this pick. I don't think it makes any sense at all. The Browns have said publicly that they believe Travis Hunter is probably more of a wide receiver than a cornerback. When was the last time you saw a wide receiver go 2 overall? That just doesn't happen these days. I think it was Calvin Johnson, I believe, according to Walton. To me, that we're not talking about Calvin Johnson here. I know that he can play on both sides of the ball, but how much is he actually going to do that? Is it going to be that worthwhile that you take him second overall, the first wide receiver to go second overall in nearly 20 years? It just doesn't make sense to me. I don't agree with this pick. This should be an Abdul Carter pick. They badly need edge rush help opposite Myles Garrett. Can you imagine how good the edge rush is going to be with Myles Garrett and with Abdul Carter opposite him? They could be very difficult to beat defensively if they had that. Instead, they go Travis Hunter. He doesn't really add that much offensively to them. He just gives them a new rookie receiver for their non-quarterback to throw to. And ultimately, they end up still rebuilding, and they're still going to struggle this year. Now, to be fair, this seems like it's going to be a multi-year rebuild, but they've given Myles Garrett a big contract for a couple of years. So they're kind of putting themselves in a window for the short term. I just don't think this all fits together. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand what they're doing, but I do expect the Browns will at some stage come back, either late first round if they trade up or early second round and grab themselves a quarterback, maybe a Jackson Dart or Sanders if he really falls, or potentially a Tyler Shaw, or maybe a Quinn Ewers. Potentially. One of those guys will go either second round, maybe very early third round if the Browns are feeling confident their guy will fall that far, because there's really not that many teams that need a quarterback, and there's quite a few good options available. Jalen Milroe is another option, for example, as well. Now, assuming Hunter goes here, that's bad news for the Giants as well, because they could have really used Travis Hunter. Their secondary really kind of sucks. They could use an extra wide receiver to play on certain downs. What they don't need is a pass rusher. They've got Brian Burns, of course, and they've got Caden Thibodeau. So it really makes no sense for them to add another edge rusher. And yet, this is clearly the best player available to them. And it'll be crazy to pass on him because there's no one else with a clear value at this point. They clearly have decided they don't want to take Shedeur Sanders here. That's becoming publicly known. That really is telling us something because Carter is not an ideal pick for them. If they don't like Sanders that much, that means that they have him well lower on their board. And a lot of teams do seem to. It does seem like he's going to fall into the latter half of the first half unless something surprising happens. And we'll see if that occurs in this mock. Regardless, Carter will definitely be a top 3 pick. It's just whether he goes to Cleveland or the Giants. I'm expecting the Giants these days, even though I think that's a big mistake for both the Browns and the Giants. Number 4, and Will Campbell remains locked into this pick for me. I've had him locked in here the last 3 or 4 mocks, I believe. And as a general rule, the bookmakers are getting on board with me as well. It does seem like, according to Charlie Campbell, who I get a lot of my rumors from, that he works through Walter Football, of course, and I recommend looking into his stuff. He and Tony Paulina in particular are excellent, so go check out their rumors if you're interested in that sort of thing. He's been talking about the Patriots loving Will Campbell for quite some time. If they can't get Hunter or Carter, Campbell is going to be their guy, and that's what happens here. Hunter and Carter are gone. Shedeur Sanders is not in the way to take up one of those picks, and they end up having to take the O-lineman. I think Campbell really does feel a need. They need to protect Drake May for the long-term future. They're not going to be winning straight away this year, so they need to be getting their O-line sorted, allowing them to also activate that run game that was pretty poor last year as well. They signed Ramondre Stevenson a heap of money, and they couldn't really use him because their O-line was terrible, so Campbell helps in both phases there as well. I think this is a good, solid pick. Of course, it's entirely possible that we see Membu go here. That's not impossible. He did have a great combine, and he has been rising. Also, don't be totally surprised if you see someone like a Jalon Walker or a Mason Graham. They are players generally considered to belong around the edge of the top 5. So wouldn't be crazy for the Patriots to decide they want to go defensive side of the ball as well. They do have weaknesses all over the place. Mason Graham's kind of been locked in as the popular number 5 pick for quite some time. I don't know that this is necessarily the right choice here, but it seems like what's going to happen. Originally, I had Kenneth Grant going here because I think he's just a better player, but Graham does offer a little bit more upside. He's more of a pass rushing presence rather than just a big bodied run stuffer. So it does make sense that he'd go as the first DT off the board. Having said that, I do think there's some other options here. I know a lot of people that I trust are mocking Memboy here, and I think it makes sense. They definitely need some tackle help. They need to protect Trevor Lawrence. They need to activate the passing game. They've got a good quarterback. They've got good wide receivers, and they can't pass because the O-line's not good enough. So I think Membu makes sense here, but I also think Mason Gray makes sense because their DTs truly do suck. This is a very deep class for defensive tackles, though, so it wouldn't surprise me if they go O-line here and then go defensive tackle later on, and that'll trigger some consequences down the line as well. And number 6, though, I don't think this pick will change. I can't see Genty going anywhere in the top 5, but I do think it makes sense to take him here at 6 for the Raiders. Now, to be fair, I wouldn't personally do this. I don't think they're ready quite to be challenging yet, but I do think this will take some pressure off Geno Smith. And if they want to win games, why they want to win games now when they're not going to win the Super Bowl, I don't know. But if they do want to win games, then Genty is definitely going to help them. He's going to make it harder for teams just to play the pass and really put pressure on Geno Smith. They couldn't run the ball effectively last year, which has always been a strength of theirs. Now, to be fair, if it was me, I'd have a very strong O-line and then put in an average running back like a lot of good teams do, and they make that work. But I can see them going the other way. Genty is going to help both as a runner and a receiver out of the backfield. This is around the spot that you would expect him to go. I'll be surprised if he makes it out of the top 10, but I feel like this is probably his ceiling. I can't imagine him going in the top 5 unless someone really falls in love with him and jumps over the Raiders to go get him. If that happens, I think that Will Johnson is a viable pick here. In fact, I think Will Johnson's a viable pick here either way. I know Walt and Charlie from Walter Football have both mocked Will Johnson here. I don't know that that's necessarily going to happen, but they do badly need a cornerback out wide. They brought in Nate Hobbs, but I feel like they need someone out wide as well, and Johnson would be a good pick. It just seems that the general perception is he doesn't deserve to go quite this high. He's not quite that high a player. And here's Membu here going to the Jets. A lot of people linking either Membu or Warren to the Jets. And I think that makes perfect sense. They're both positions that the Jets need. They need a right tackle opposite Olu Fashanu, who, of course, they took in last year's draft in 13th overall, I think. I think they probably should have taken Bowers, but of course they pass on him. I guess Bowers went at 13. Shannon would a bit earlier. But I think they should have taken Bowers at that point in time. Bowers is a significantly better player to Tyler Warren. And now it seems like they're regretting it and thinking about taking Warren here instead. Warren is not that player. He's a bit of a love-hate prospect, and it seems like the Jets kind of love him, and I think that's going to be a bit of a mistake. I feel like there are better players available here, and Membu is one of them. He really helps them out and gives Justin Fields the best chance of succeeding this year, or whatever quarterback they happen to draft early on day 2, depending on what happens in training camp. I've got to assume it's going to be Justin Fields week 1 of 2025, though. So Membu would be the guy going in at right tackle. Now, the real question is, what happens if Membu goes to the Jags at 5 or goes to the Pats at 4? Well, obviously, if he goes to the Pats, Will Campbell's available here. Potentially the Jets decide to select Campbell. If Membu goes to the Jags at 5 and Campbell's gone at 4, I don't think they're going to be reaching for Kelvin Banks here. They're going to have to do something else. Could be Tyler Warren, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see Mason Graham go here. They do need defensive tackle help. Having someone next to Quinn Williams will really help them out defensively. I can imagine that happening as well. Now, Jalen Walker, I've been mocking an edge to the Panthers since the beginning of time, basically, or certainly since my first mock draft. But it's Walker this time. It has been Michael Williams a couple of times, but the last couple I've put Walker in. He does seem to have moved above his college teammate. I don't agree with it personally. I think Walker's a solid player, but I think Michael Williams is a far safer pick and more likely to definitely give the production that you're paying for with this pick. Walker just has pretty solid upside. Is he going to be good on the line of scrimmage? I'm not really sure. I don't know that he really quite fits this scheme, but I think it might end up being okay. So I could imagine Walker going here. Could imagine Williams going here. I'd be very surprised if it's anybody else. I think it's probably going to be some sort of edge rusher. I guess they potentially could pick another edge rusher. Guys like Mike Green and James Pierce have big upside. If they're not worried at all about the character issues, it would be reasonable to think that one of those guys belongs in this pick. And here's Shedeur Sanders. I didn't have him here originally at my most recent intermediate mock. I dropped him out of the first round entirely. But then, of course, we've got news that Derek Carr has some major shoulder issues. I don't think it really makes sense to bring Sanders in here. Firstly, because it's not like you're winning anytime in the near future, and you still got Derek Carr hanging around. You're paying him a massive contract. He's got like $70 million cap hit next year. Now, they will push that down the road, but that's a huge part of your cap. You're not winning with that much cap going to a quarterback, especially if it's not even the quarterback that you're using. It's the same issue that the Browns have. They're not winning in the near future when they're paying Deshaun Watson a whole heap of money, even when he's not playing. So it doesn't make sense to bring Sanders here at this point. Yet, I think it's probably what they're going to do. It does seem the more likely option, or at least a viable option. The bookmakers certainly have it as the more likely option here. Now, it could feasibly, of course, be Dart as well, but I feel like Sanders is quite a bit ahead of Dart for most teams. Now, if they don't take Sanders, what happens? Who knows? There's a whole heap of possibilities, and this was a difficult spot to mock previously. Previously, I have Will Johnson going here, and I think that's very possible. They could go O-line to try to make life easier for Carr. Even D-line's a possibility, but I feel like in this case, it is going to be Sanders, which makes the rest of that moot. Tyler Warren, this is a new pick for me, moving him into the top 10. Do I think this is likely to happen? No. But I don't think that any pick is likely to happen here. There's 4 very viable options. They could end up with Genty if Will Johnson goes at 6 overall, because I don't think any of the teams in between are likely to take him. Possible a team jumps up, or even possible that the Bears jump up to get Genty. They do seem to really love him. We know that Ben Johnson loves that dual running back approach. Putting him together with DeAndre Swift makes sense. So I could imagine Genty going here. I do think that D-line is a possibility, but I think O-line makes more sense. They've really spent a lot of money on trying to get some support for Caleb Williams this season. But I feel like they're kind of one man short. And I feel like bringing in a Kelvin Banks here would make sense. They'd love Membu to fall or Campbell, but in this case, they're both gone. Banks is an option here, and I feel like if it's not Warren, Banks is the guy you go with. In fact, I would personally go with Banks in this situation, but I feel like they're kind of done with the whole kind of Cole Kmet thing, and they're happy to actually get a proper pass-catching a tight end, giving themselves a proper outlet there that Caleb Williams can use, especially now that they don't have the same depth of wide receiver that they had previously. So Warren would give them that. Is this a good pick? Not so sure. Is this a likely pick? I think it's entirely possible, but I don't think it's necessarily likely. Number 11, here's Will Johnson. I don't think the San Francisco is necessarily likely to take a cornerback, but Johnson's going to go somewhere in this range. I feel like 6 makes sense to the Raiders. I feel like 9 makes sense to the Saints, I should say. And I feel like even 10 is not out of the question. If a team moves up with the Bears, or alternatively, if the Bears move up to go past the Raiders, then I can imagine the Raiders moving back and grabbing a cornerback later on. So there are a number of situations where this could happen, but Will Johnson belongs somewhere in this range. He is, to me, the clear number one cornerback, not named Travis Hunter. Very solid player. Has a few issues with taking too many risks and kind of going for balls and missing out, but you can kind of coach that out of players. You don't want to really remove their instincts entirely, but I do think that Johnson is someone that is a very reasonable top 12 pick. Even though it is possible he slides, I feel like the odds are he'll go somewhere in this range. Another player that could definitely slide, I know a couple of people that I trust saying that he'll go after both tight ends and both running backs. And I think that's possible. But I've still got Tetairoa McMillan going to the Cowboys. Seems the most likely pick, and the bookies certainly agree it's the most likely pick. But I don't think it's more likely than all the other possibilities combined. I think Will Johnson could easily go here if he continues to fall. Kelvin Banks makes sense. They need to improve their O-line, make things easier for Dak Prescott. You could even see them taking a defensive tackle. Problem is, I think Kenneth Grant's a little bit too similar to Muzzy Smith, so I don't know that necessarily makes sense here. I feel like they need another big receiver to go with CeeDee Lamb. They obviously lost Brandon Cooks. They got no one else. Really. So bring McMillan and give him a proper big-bodied receiver. There are concerns about whether he can separate at the NFL level. But if you've got Lamb running around, all of a sudden that's making your life a whole lot easier. So bring McMillan in. He and Jake Ferguson kind of become those big targets, and Lamb gets a whole lot more space. And here's Kelvin Banks falling to 13. I say falling. I actually mocked him here last time as well. Of course, that was when Shedeur Sanders was around, and that meant that Will Campbell was going later. So with Membu and Campbell both going in the top 7, I feel like this is kind of the floor for Banks. I can't see him getting past too many more teams than this. And look, Tua Tagovailoa needs to stop doing dopey stuff, but they can help him out by making their O-line better, and I feel like that's the most likely outcome. It's probably also the floor for Will Johnson. I feel like Johnson's here. They probably take him instead, especially if Banks is gone. I don't see them reaching up for someone else. I have, in my intermediate draft, mocked them Gray Zabel, but that was more of a holder pick. I feel like if Banks is gone, they're not going O-line. There are other options here that they can take, and I feel like they make sense more. For example, I think this is probably the ceiling for Nick Emmanwori. I've got him falling a little bit more now because I just feel like safeties do tend to fall in drafts, and I feel like this is a bit too early for him. But I know a lot of people are mocking him here, and it makes sense. They need someone to replace Javon Holland. Their secondary is very weak. I just feel like it's a bit too early for that. And this is a new one for me. And I haven't really seen it in many mocks at all, or potentially even any. Colson Loveland going at 14 to the Colts. I've had him to the Chargers for a while, and that's become a very popular pick. But I just feel like if we see Warren go earlier, then all of a sudden the Colts probably still go tight end. I think they go Loveland. The bookies certainly have Loveland as likely to go in the top 19. Not really many other teams that are likely to take a tight end here. Maybe the Seahawks, maybe a team trades up to go get one, but I don't know. The Colts make the most sense, and I feel like Loveland, if Warren's not available, they probably just go Loveland. The other possibility is maybe Tyler Booker, but it feels too early for a pure guard to go in this draft class. I just don't think it really makes sense. Also, some people mocking them safeties and cornerbacks. Cornerback's more of a need. Safety, they just brought in Cam Barnum. I don't know if they really need another safety, but Emmanwori could go somewhere in this range. This is certainly where we could start seeing him off the board. So some really weird options here for the Colts. Very different players than most of the teams around them. We don't see many teams whose needs are like tight end, guard, and safety, but it's a good spot to be in because you're not competing with many other teams. You can kind of sit and pick or even drop back a few spots if a couple of you guys are available. And here's something that I've been mocking for ages. And when I say for ages, I mean for about 3 years. The Falcons have needed edge rush help for as long as I can remember. They tried to take Laiatu Latu last year, and then Michael Penix was there, and they just couldn't help themselves and lost me a fair amount of points in mock draft accuracy and a fair amount of money as well, because I had Latu going to them for a long time, and there was good money on it as well. And apparently, they were going to take Latu until they fell in love with Michael Penix. Surely they go edge rush help here. Look, They had the second fewest sacks last year. They really need to get to the quarterback. Micah Williams is a very safe pick who can help them do that. If they want a little bit more upside, could go for a couple of players like Mike Green, Jamar Stewart, even James Pierce, who some teams really love. But I feel like Williams just makes the most sense here. Anytime you take a Georgia edge rusher, you're in a pretty good spot, especially in this draft. Now, Kenneth Grant has fallen a little bit in this one to me, but there are a lot of teams that certainly think he's going to fall, or I should say a lot of experts who suggest that he's going to fall, because many consider him as more of a nose tackle than a true defensive tackle. He doesn't really have the same edge rushing skills as Mason Graham. I personally think he's the better player. It's just not as much a premium position to be a run stuffer as it is to be an interior pressurer as a defensive tackle. So for that reason, I've got him going to 16. He could definitely go lower. I've had Walter Nolan going here previously, and that's still possible, I guess. We know the Cardinals need D-line help, but it's not impossible. They go O-line if the right players available. They're not in this draft, I don't think. Or cornerback, I've given him Jahdae Barron before, and I feel like this is kind of his ceiling, so we could see Barron here as well. And it's not out of the question they go for someone like a Jahad Campbell here, although he is falling, and we'll talk about that later. So Grant makes sense here, but I think D-line in general is probably going to be the pick. And here's a new pick. I've had Nick Emanwari here previously, but I've got them moving to the edge because there are a lot of rumors around that Trey Hendrickson will be moving on around or just after the draft. They're going to need edge help if that's going to be the case. They also probably need defensive tackle help too. There's no one kind of obvious for them to take here, and they've still got enough depth there to sort of get by, but they really do need edge help. They can't be using like Joseph Versailles as their top edge rusher. That's just not going to work. And Miles Murphy's been a total dud. So I feel like Mike Green is a reasonable fit here. Very high upside player, but certainly some questionable character issues. I don't really know exactly what happened here. We're certainly seeing players fall and unfairly because of supposed character issues, but he did have a suspension at Virginia. And I think that teams will be taking that into account. It's just based on their risk tolerance. And I feel like the Bengals are the kind of team that will be willing to take that sort of risk. I feel like Green could go anywhere between here and early second round. And I feel like here is totally reasonable. The bookmakers agree. They certainly have his odds of going in the top 17 rising. And I feel like that's all down to the Falcons and the Cardinals and the Bengals, all potentially needing edge rushers. And if they're going to take edge rushers, there's really only three guys that really make sense. It's Green, it's Williams, obviously Walker and Carter, I should say, are off the board. And then you could potentially also see someone like Jamar Stewart in this range as well, although I had him falling in my last couple of mocks for reasons we'll talk about later on. So Green rises up this mock. On the other hand, Tyler Booker, well, he's kind of been all over the place for me. I've had mocks where he's not in there at all. I've had him to the Vikings at 24. I've had him to the Colts at 14. I think that the main landing spots that make sense for him are the Colts and the Seahawks. Seahawks, they really just need interior line help. They've got two very good tackles, but they need to work on the interior of the line because it was awful last year, made life very difficult for their quarterbacks. Now with Sam Darnold, I feel like they're going to need to give him proper support because he's not the kind of quarterback that can get away with bad O-line play. So Booker slots in here. It could easily be a Gray Zabel or someone like that. Or any number of other O-linemen. There are quite a few solid mid-range to late first-round options they could take, but Booker is my favorite as a pure guard. I think he makes all the sense in the world here. I feel like this is also where we'll start to see conversations about potentially seeing Matthew Golden off the board as a wide receiver. I had him here in my last draft. I feel like that makes sense, but I don't think it makes that much sense. I think O-line is a greater need. They can certainly get by with JSN and their other receivers, Jake Bobo and guys like that, but they can kind of get to fill in and then they can get a second day guy. And I feel like that's more of the number two that they need. They don't need to keep getting first round wide receivers. Jahad Campbell continues going to the Buccaneers for me. I think I've had him here in every single mock, but I'm feeling less confident about it now. Certainly some reports that his shoulder surgery is going to cause him to fall a little bit. How far? Not entirely sure. He does certainly offer an edge rush presence, and that's something that the Bucs also need. So it's possible they can use him as a bit of a Micah Parsons style player. A lot of talk that maybe Jalen Walker could also do that sort of thing for the Panthers, but I could definitely see Campbell doing that. But look, it's not out of the realms of the possibilities for the Bucs to take a linebacker an inside linebacker in the first round anyway. They did it with Devin White. Shahad Campbell is not Devin White, but he's got a heap of upside. Feels like the kind of risk that the Bucks might take. If not, they probably attack the edge rush, especially if Campbell's not available or if they're just not comfortable with his medicals. And with Campbell gone, the Broncos can still take a number of options that are very different to teams around them. Running back, wide receiver, potentially safety. Essentially, I think are the main positions I could see going here. Have been some recent reports about Nick Emenwari potentially going here. I don't think that really makes sense. They have okay safety play. I feel like they're more likely to work on the offense. They kind of got the line sorted and they've got Bo Nix, but kind of need to give him a few more weapons. They went and got Evan Ingram, but I don't think that totally takes out the possibility of him getting a tight end. Not that one fell to them here anyway. But running back is their greatest need. They can't go forward with Jaleel McLaughlin as their running back. He was mediocre last year. He will continue to be mediocre. He's a shifty back, but you don't want him getting more than 5 or 6 rushes a game. That's just got to be his role. Change of pace, purely. That's it. Murray and Hampton would be the perfect complement to him. Big back can play on every single down. You bring McLaughlin in to spell him, and that's it. You're not giving McLaughlin a role. He's just coming in to spell it, and Hampton is available on every single down. I think that makes more sense. If Hampton's either not available, if they decide to go in another direction, I still expect them to take a running back like maybe one of the Ohio State guys in the second round. So Hampton's my pick here, but it wouldn't shock me entirely if they went wide receiver. I personally wouldn't. I think they're fine. They've got Courtland Sutton and they've got Mims, Franklin, and Valet, all of whom were fine last year. So there's no real reason for them to go wide receiver here. Having said that, teams do weird stuff. Jordan Payton does weird stuff. So a McMillan, if he falls, or potentially Matthew Golden, would also make sense here too. Now, the Steelers probably go Shedeur Sanders here if he's available, but that hasn't occurred in this draft, and rumor has it they don't like Jackson Dart enough to take him this early. That's not to say they won't take Dart later on. They could trade down, for example, but I think it is far more likely that they stick and pick a defensive tackle or something in that realm there. They certainly need help along the D-line. They're definitely aging a lot there, and their play there has been disappointing. Derek Harmon, very solid first-round guy at the moment, can play on all 3 downs. Certainly needs some work on his rush technique, but I feel like he's got the upside to make it work. I've now got him going ahead of his college teammate, Jordan Bush, but I don't know. How high does he go? I feel like probably edge of the top 20 is kind of his ceiling. I can't see him going much earlier than this, but it is possible. He's certainly the first-round guy with Birch falling out. Don't totally discount the possibility of a running back here. I think Hampton definitely belongs somewhere in this range, and I can imagine him going in this spot. And I think cornerback is, I guess, possible. Though, again, Barron's available, and I'm still giving them Harmon, which should tell you something. And this is a new one. Obviously, I've had Loveland going here previously. I've also had them taking a cornerback in Thomas, who's now out of my first round. But Walter Nolan definitely going to go somewhere in the first round. It's just going to be whichever team loves him. Very much a love-hate prospect. Where he goes, not entirely sure, but we know that Jim Harbaugh loves to attack the trenches. This is a good opportunity to do this with Nolan, give him a solid defensive tackle, get some interior edge rush presence. Their defensive tackles at the moment are particularly weak. They're solid at stopping the run, but they don't really offer much in the pass game. They need to change this, make it a little bit easier for their edge rushers, give the defense something else to think about. I think Nolan does exactly that. Obviously, tight end's also an option. It wouldn't surprise me to see a wide receiver. Golden's fallen here, and I feel like this is a spot where we could see him go too, so don't be surprised if that occurs either. And here's Jahdae Barron, his full stops here. Some people believe he's going to be the first cornerback off the board. I've seen him mocked at 9 to the Saints by a number of people who generally are pretty accurate, which is surprising to me. I do feel like he's probably going to be in the first round. I don't think he's going to be the first one off the board. I think Johnson is the guy. Barron's a little bit small. To me, better suited to be a slot guy. Could play out wide, but not in a big receiver and more as a number 2 type. So look, we'll see what happens with Barron, but I do feel like the Packers definitely need to get a cornerback, and they definitely need to get a defensive tackle. 2 defensive tackles just went. They're the main 2 guys that make sense in this range, so they go cornerback instead. I feel like they're going to get one of those 3 guys, either a Barron or a Harmon or a Nolan, maybe Kenneth Grant if he falls. And if none of those are available, maybe a Maxwell Hairston, who I mocked him last time around. And here's Nick Emanwari. His full ends. And the Vikings, I mean, they're the most likely team to take a safety, according to bookmakers, and it does make sense. Ken Barnum left, taking his awesome dance moves with him. I love that guy. Tried to get a jersey, ended up with Justin Jefferson. Very disappointing. And Harrison Smith also getting older as well. So they need to bring someone in, and Emanwari makes a lot of sense. Could also be Malaki Starks if Emanwari is already done. Both of those guys, very good safeties, but it is really hard to pick safeties in the first round. Rarely goes well. We've seen the Vikings bust with it before with Lewis Cine. Obviously, you've got to hope there's going to be no injury issues here and no busting happening with these guys. Emanwari is an elite prospect. I think it makes sense here. It's a kind of range where I think it's a lot safer to take a safety. So I would be happy to see this occur. And here's a change for me. I've had the Texans taking defensive guys for quite some time, but I can't keep arguing with the bookmakers. They've got O-line as being a heavy favorite here. I get it. The O-line rebuild is definitely happening here. They've gotten rid of a lot of very good O-linemen and replaced them with guys that aren't quite as good. They need to keep retooling that line, protecting CJ Stroud. But for me, they also really need defensive tackle help. And wide receiver is not out of the question, even though they picked up Christian Kirk, because Stephon Diggs left, and Kirk's clearly the replacement of that. But it's not like you're going to have Tank Dell. So wide receiver is also a real possibility here. But I'm giving him Josh Simmons. Very good offensive tackle. I think Ray Zabel equally could have gone here. And when I was thinking about it, maybe I regret not making it double with this pick. But Simmons definitely has upside. ACL injury really hurt him, but plenty of upside. And you can imagine the Texans falling in love with that and his potential to be better as a tackle compared to Zabel, who has quite short arms, even relative to Will Campbell, who's been copying it for that quite a bit. And here's Maxwell Hairston. Previously had him at the Packers, now moving him to the Rams. Rams could go in a number of directions, and it's hard to know exactly what they're going to do. I think cornerback makes a lot of sense. They've kind of struggled with that position for a while. I think linebacker is possible. If Jahad Campbell is around, I could easily imagine them doing that. They can't keep getting by with scrubs like Christian Rosenboom, who, of course, has moved on anyway. O-line, left tackle in particular, is a possibility, though I don't think it's as much of a need as it was originally. Look, there's a heap of possibilities here. Tight end, Tyler Higbee obviously isn't what he used to be. Wide receiver is someone I've mocked them a lot. I can imagine Matthew Golden going here, and I nearly mocked him here. Even someone like Emeka Egbuka, I think also would make sense. I've mocked him here as well. They do need kind of another complement to Puka Nacua. And of course, they've got Devontae Adams at the moment, but that doesn't mean getting a number 3 guy doesn't make sense. I think Tutu Atwell coming in was really on a 1-year deal just to give them options, but I feel like if the right wide receivers there, they probably take one. In this case, they take Hairston, very quick guy, blew up the combine. They don't usually get early quarterbacks, the Rams, and that's why their secondary kind of sucks. So I feel like unless they're planning on continuing to try to get bargains later in the draft in the secondary, I think Hairston's a good pick here. Shemar Stewart falls again for me. I can't find spots for him. It just doesn't make sense to me. There's not a lot of spots in the early 20s that need an edge rusher. And I feel like Stewart's a very risky player. Obviously very athletic. For that reason, could go as early as the Panthers at 8. I know that's been talked about, and the Saints at 9 as well. But for me, I don't know. That lack of production was awful. Killed me in my fantasy league last year. You can't have someone who got 1.5 sacks in his last year in college going early in the first round. That's just crazy. Clearly, there's some issue there. Maybe it's a lack of ability to turn the corner. Maybe it's just he needs a lot of coaching. Regardless, he can't be going too early. And for that reason, I've gone going late in the first round. The Ravens potentially get a bargain. You know, they love to take a risk and go for the player that's falling. Stewart is that player in this draft. But they could equally go cornerback, safety, O-line, or maybe they even trade out for a team coming up to get a cornerback and getting that extra year, that club option that you get if you pick a player in the first round. I think that's possible with a Dart or a Sanders if he falls. Here's Ezeruaku out of Boston College. He goes to the Lions because he's a Dan Campbell guy. He's a leader. He's hardworking. I feel like he's the kind of guy that would fit their culture perfectly. Small speed rusher to go opposite Aiden Hutchinson, really elevate their their defense in general, but especially their pass defense. O-line's also not impossible to help out Jared Goff. But I feel like edge is the number one spot they aim for, because they can get someone solid opposite Hutchinson. It's going to make life a whole lot easier for Aiden Hutchinson as well. Here's Matthew Golden. This isn't really a good fit for him. He just needs to go somewhere. I can't have a first round mock without Matthew Golden in it. He's going to go somewhere in the first round. I just don't know where. Could be the Seahawks, could be the Rams. Packers not totally out of the question, but I don't think it really makes sense for them to take another kind of wide receiver 2 type. So I've got him going to Washington. I feel like he fits in nicely with Deebo Samuel and Terry McLaurin. Get a lot of super speed there. Obviously, McLaurin's already the F1 there, but Golden, very quick, blew up the combine with a sub 4.3 second 40. I don't know that he's really that great a player, but he's certainly likely to go somewhere in the first round in what is a weak wide receiver class. I think for the Commanders personally, though, I think they're more likely to go edge rush. I've given him James Pierce in the past. That would make sense here. But I've got Golden in this mock. I probably won't have this here in my final mock. Malaki Starks goes here at 30 to the Bills. I've been giving him a defensive tackle the whole time, but there's really no defensive tackle I believe belongs in the first round. I do think one will rise him. I don't know who that is. I think I've had Alfred Collins in the past because he's a good run stuffer, but I feel like I can probably just wait for the second of one of those guys, a Collins or a Birch or a Williams or someone like that will be available. So for that reason, I've got Stark sliding in here. I didn't have him in my last mock, but he does seem highly likely to go somewhere on the edge of the first round, maybe very early second. So Starks kind of fits what they need. They can't keep using DeMar Hamlin. The story's great, but he's not a very good safety. More of a special teams guy, in my opinion. So improve their run defense with a guy who's a very good run defender, a very good tackler. Starks belongs somewhere in this area. Grey Zubble, this is way too late for him. He should be going earlier, but they can't really find a fit for him. Potentially Seahawks or Texans make sense, or another team just goes up and gets him, or another team goes away from what's expected and gets him. He does feel like he belongs somewhere because he has been a very good player. Concern here is he's got pretty short arms, and that can limit players from playing tackle. But even so, he's perfectly feasible as a guard option. That makes him a pretty safe pick. The Chiefs really need to work on protecting Patrick Mahomes. I just don't know that Zubble really makes sense because I think he's less likely to end up profiling as a tackle. But I think it's possible, and he needs to go somewhere in the first round, so I'm sliding him in here. I think he probably ends up going a bit higher to a team that more needs interior help. I also think it's possible that the Chiefs go for an edge rusher and probably end up taking one or a defensive tackle somewhere in the second round, but I'd love to see O-line in the first. Finally, here's James Pierce. I have him going somewhere in the first round for me. That this is a guy who's got some proper character issues that's got him dropping off boards. I'm not going to get into why, but I do think that it is possible he falls to day 2. The bookies are kind of split on that, but he's got so much upside. There are quite a few teams, according to Charlie Campbell, who have him as their number 1 edge rusher outside Abdul-Qadir, which means he could feasibly go in the top 10. It's just I think he's more likely to fall. The Eagles can afford to take a risk on character. You win the Super Bowl, you can go out and get players who might not necessarily work, but at least give you that chance to go back-to-back. I think Pierce is one of those players with huge upside. If he hits, gosh, he is going to hit. The problem is he could also be someone that's totally unusable for them. They need a Josh Sweat replacement, so Pierce fits in nicely for them. And that's all we've got for Mock Draft 5.0. A couple of surprise guys that didn't make it in. Couldn't get either of the wide receivers in, Emeka Egbuka and Luther Burden. Burden's looking more likely to fall out of the first round. He's more of a small slot guy, nearly a gadget guy. I don't think it really makes sense for teams to take him. Egbuka, I think, is a better player. I think he probably should be somewhere in the first round. In fact, for me, I'd have him ahead of Golden. I actually think he's a better player. But in this case, I just couldn't find a team that would take him, but I think he'll probably end up somewhere in the first round. And of course, Jackson Dart, I feel like he is a likely first round player. Not sure exactly where, but I think someone's going to trade up, probably the Browns or the Giants, maybe the Raiders or the Saints if they don't take Sanders, trade up to get him. And if Sanders isn't taken by the Saints, don't be surprised if he ends up going late in the first round as well. If you've got any questions or thoughts, hit me up in the comments below. Or you can message me over Instagram at the Fantasy First Down or Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. My mock draft is continually being updated over at ffdfantasyfootball.com. You can check out my articles about this very mock over at football.razzball.com. That'll be appearing in the next couple of days. Plus, you could also like and subscribe on YouTube, and you can just wait out for the next mock that will be coming in the current days. Also, make sure you check out the World of Football YouTube channel, where I will be appearing in a couple of live shows over the coming days and have done in the last few days as well. If you're interested, also make sure you go back and check out my last video where I talked about what the bookmakers think is going to happen in this draft, and I might pop up another brief one of those in the coming days as well. I hope you enjoy a very safe and happy Easter period, and I look forward to chatting to you guys on the next video.